He was looking for peace and quiet in the mountains and accidentally found a door in the rock. Behind it were people in cages, alive, forgotten. He shouldn't have seen it, but he couldn't look away. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are from. The wind howled like a living beast across the slopes, scattering dry snow into the air in biting gusts that clawed at Jonathan Cale's jacket. He moved deliberately, carefully placing one crampon boot in front of the other, his ice axe steady in his right hand. The white wilderness around him stretched unbroken for miles, a brutal and silent world that seemed to absorb all sound, all breath. This far into the Rockies, he knew there was no one, no hikers, no rescue teams, no footprints but his own. And that was the point. At 45, Jonathan Cale had stopped looking for company. Years of military service had weathered his body and taught him to depend on no one but himself. But it was what came after that truly carved the solitude into his bones. The loss of Sarah 3 winters ago in a rain-slick car crash, her laughter silenced in an instant, had hollowed him in ways even war could not. He had tried to return to the world afterward, tried to live in the wake of her absence, but the hours became too quiet, the rooms too still, and the glances from others too full of pity. So he fled to the only place that still made sense upward, into the vast and merciless quiet of the mountains. This climb was different. He had chosen a route few even knew about, an unmarked spur that wound away from known trails and into a harsh, forgotten range where maps ended in blank spaces. There was no glory here, no summit to photograph or name to add to a list. Only rock, wind, and snow, and a silence so complete it felt like the earth itself had turned its back. He welcomed it. The weight in his chest, the ache he carried with him since that night Sarah died, felt lighter here, less visible, somehow. Snow had been falling steadily since before dawn, muting the sharp edges of the rocks and softening the slope underfoot. The visibility had dwindled to a dozen yards at best, and the sky hung low with flat, gray menace. Jonathan paused near a rocky outcrop, brushing frost from his goggles, and glanced at the barometer on his watch. The pressure was dropping fast. A storm was coming, worse than forecasted. He debated whether to press on or hunker down, and finally decided he would find shelter. He had passed a shallow cave formation earlier in the day, but that was miles behind now. The slope before him narrowed into a channel between 2 towering ridges, and instinct told him it might hold some kind of windbreak. He pressed forward. The snow deepened as he trudged, swallowing his boots up to the calves. Each step took effort, and fatigue gnawed at his thighs and back. Ice crusted the seams of his jacket and clung to his beard. He didn't speak, hadn't spoken in days, not since he'd left the last ranger station 100 miles south. Silence suited him. The wind didn't talk back. The mountain didn't ask questions. He came to a sheer wall of ice and rock, strange in shape, its surface too smooth, too symmetrical to be natural. Frowning, Jonathan took a step closer, running a gloved hand over the surface. Beneath a thin sheen of frost, his fingers traced metal. Not old, rusted debris. This was clean, industrial. He stepped back, scanning the wall. The shape was wrong for an outcrop. It was rectangular, vertical, and slightly recessed into the ridge. He began brushing away the snow with the back of his arm. Soon a vertical seam appeared, then a narrow panel flat, black, and embedded in the surface like a keypad. There were no markings, no logos, no buttons. Just a faint rectangular outline that pulsed softly once when he touched it. He froze, pulse quickening. This was no ranger station, no weather research hut. It wasn't even abandoned. It was waiting. The storm was almost on him now. Snow fell harder, wind screaming down from the higher ridges, visibility dropping to nothing. He had no choice. Shelter was shelter, even if it came with questions. Jonathan pushed gently against the metal. The door gave slightly, just enough to suggest it wasn't locked. He braced himself, wedged the tip of his axe into the seam, and forced it open with a groaning metallic protest. A rush of warm, dry air washed over him. His breath fogged instantly in the contrast. He stepped inside. The door closed behind him with a heavy thunk. At once the silence returned, deeper now, insulated in total. The corridor before him was narrow and metallic, lit with dim ceiling panels that flickered on as he moved. He turned off his headlamp and lowered his hood. The air inside was breathable, faintly stale but clean. The walls were smooth steel and the floor grated metal. He paused, scanning for signs of life, of movement, of noise. Nothing. Just the low hum of machinery somewhere deep within. He moved cautiously. The hallway extended for several dozen meters before branching into a small vestibule with closed doors on either side. Each door bore a colored light above it, green on one, red on the other. He avoided touching them, instead moving toward what looked like a control station, a console with a bank of screens, all dark. When he brushed the edge, one screen flickered to life. It displayed a grainy overhead image of a room, concrete, windowless. Inside were people. 3, maybe 4. Slumped against the wall, motionless. One raised their head slowly, looking directly at the camera, then at him. Jonathan's breath caught. The figure had sunken eyes, a hollowed face, and an expression of muted despair. They didn't move further. Just watched, as if waiting. He stepped back, pulse thudding in his ears. This wasn't a military base. It wasn't abandoned. He moved deeper into the corridor, ignoring the tremble in his gut. The next door he passed was partially open, revealing a darkened room with bunk-style beds, all empty. Blankets folded tightly. No personal items. No names. Across the hall, another door opened onto a sterile white space with metal cabinets, stacked crates, and sealed coolers. Some were labeled. One read, Nutrient Units, Exip 2020 Another said, Medical Kits, Level 3, Use Only. It wasn't the labeling that disturbed him. It was how new everything looked. How clean, untouched. He circled back to the control room, began trying buttons. Another screen lit up. More rooms. More people. Some lying on mats. Others sitting with knees to chests, unmoving. The camera quality was poor, but it was enough. Enough to see resignation. Enough to recognize captivity. What the hell was this place? He moved to another panel and found a map, a schematic of the underground facility. The section he was in was labeled Observation 2B. Several other labeled areas spread out deeper into the mountain. Containment Wing 1, Processing, Transit Hold, and farther still, Storage, Restricted. Jonathan stepped back. It wasn't the names that chilled him. It was how far this place extended under the snow. He took out his satellite tracker, flicked it on. The signal flickered and dropped. He tried again. Still nothing. Whatever shielding this place used blocked transmissions. He was alone. Fully alone. And he was standing in the heart of something that had been meant never to be found. The flickering screen in front of him changed, seemingly at random. It showed a woman curled on a mat, thin blanket pulled to her chin. Her eyes opened slowly, then looked at the camera again. No panic, no surprise. Only the tired patience of someone who had been waiting for anything. Jonathan's hands trembled. He turned away, heart hammering in his chest, and retraced his steps through the corridor. The metal door was still ajar, snow swirling outside. The storm was in full force now, but it no longer seemed the greater danger. He stepped back into the cold, pulling the door shut behind him. He would come back. He had to. But not like this. Not unprepared. Not empty-handed. As the snow bit into his face again, and the mountains swallowed the entrance behind him, Jonathan Cale began the slow descent with something burning in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. A purpose. Something was wrong in these mountains, and he would not leave it buried beneath the ice. The snow had not relented through the night. It fell in thick, muffling drifts that swallowed every sound and erased every trace of movement across the slope. By the time Jonathan reached the cave he had marked days earlier, a shallow hollow under an overhanging shelf of stone, he was soaked through with sweat, despite the sub-zero air, and breathing in shallow bursts. The wind clawed at the mouth of the cave, but inside it was mercifully still. He dropped his pack, stripped off the upper layers of his jacket, and sat against the wall, letting the cold rock leach the tremor from his hands. His heart was still pounding, not from exertion, but from the memory of what he had seen beneath the ridge. The images played over and over in his head, those faces behind the cameras, the names on the schematic, the sterile hallways that ran deeper than any civilian installation had any right to. He had not imagined it. The cameras had been active. The heat, the lighting, the preserved food, all of it was operational, and the people inside were alive. He thought of the woman on the mat, how she had looked directly into the lens with the steadiness of someone long accustomed to being watched. There had been no struggle in her body language, no wild gestures for help, only stillness. That was what haunted him most, the absence of hope, as though escape were a concept long since buried. These were not criminals. They were not patients in some underground asylum. They were captives. He did not sleep that night, nor the following morning. Instead, he took inventory of his supplies and repacked his gear with cold precision. He would return to the facility, but not without a plan. The impulse to run headlong into that place again had passed, replaced now with something tighter, sharper. He needed to understand the scope of what he had found and how deeply it ran. A single misstep might bury him with the others, and there would be no one to come looking. By early afternoon, the storm began to lift. Sunlight filtered weakly through thinning clouds, casting a wan silver light across the mountainside. Jonathan emerged from the cave and began his ascent again, taking a different approach this time, one that would bring him around the rear of the ridge, closer to the source of the facility's external ventilation. He remembered the intake vents he'd passed earlier on his descent, small grates, flush with the snow, humming faintly. They were easy to miss unless you were looking. It took hours to reach them. The climb was slow, deliberate. He moved like a shadow along the rock, careful not to leave footprints that might lead back to his position. When he finally located the intake shaft, he knelt beside it and pressed his hand to the grate. Warm air blew steadily outward. The system was powerful industrial and far more advanced than any small research station would require. He pried gently at the edges and found the panel surprisingly loose. It had been installed hastily or perhaps tampered with before. Either way, it gave under pressure. He removed the grate and peered inside. The tunnel beyond was narrow but passable. It descended at an angle, metal-lined and dustless. He slipped in feet first, lowering himself onto the slick surface and sliding downward into the dark. The tunnel ended at a junction of metal corridors, more tightly constructed than the upper access halls he had seen the day before. These felt more clinical, more reinforced, like the bowels of a military submarine. He moved silently through them, pressing himself against the walls whenever he heard distant vibrations. Footsteps, machines, voices murmuring just beyond reach. The soundscape was hollow and echoing, as though the entire place had been designed to swallow noise rather than carry it. He passed a storage room filled with stacked containers, each sealed and marked with barcodes, numbers, and acronyms. Some were labeled with destinations and dates. One box read, TN Red Batch, 12 Dispatch 3-20, in thick stenciled ink. Another bore a series of letters that meant nothing to him, but looked too organized to be random. It was a logistics operation, meticulous and regulated. He snapped quick photos with the pocket camera he always carried, mindful to leave no trace of his passage. Further down, he found a row of narrow rooms, each with a small window set high in the door. Inside, the rooms were almost identical metal bunk, no mattress, a bucket, and a small vent near the floor. In 3 of the rooms, people were visible. 2 men, 1 woman. All were seated, silent, their eyes hollow. They did not react to his presence. Either they had not seen him or they no longer cared. In the next hallway, he discovered a terminal left unlocked. It flickered to life at his touch, revealing a simple text-based interface. There were menus labeled assignments, transit logs, and status reports. He selected the logs. A stream of dates and locations scrolled past coordinates, initials, group sizes. He recognized port names. Galveston, Seattle, Vancouver. The logs stretched back years. His breath caught. This was no isolated experiment. It was a supply chain. He copied everything he could onto a portable drive and tucked it into his inner jacket. Then he moved toward a corridor labeled Containment Wing 1. The air changed here, thicker, heavier. He passed a reinforced checkpoint, now unmanned, and slipped into the main chamber. It was vast. Hundreds of people. Not in cells, but in section rooms with transparent walls. Some were lying down. Others sat, staring. Children clung to mothers. Teenagers huddled in corners. Every face bore the same haunted glaze. And nowhere, not once, did he hear a raised voice, a shout, or a cry for help. Only the quiet hum of machinery and the shuffling of tired limbs. Jonathan's stomach turned. This was not just imprisonment. It was conditioning, suppression. He backed away, his mind spinning. He needed to get back to the surface, to transmit what he'd found. Someone had to know, someone had to come. But as he turned, he nearly stumbled into a guard. The man wore all black, tactical gear without insignia, a sidearm at his hip, and a compact rifle slung across his chest. He wasn't expecting company. His eyes widened just enough for Jonathan to act. He dropped low, grabbed the rifle barrel with one hand, and drove his elbow into the man's throat. The guard went down hard, choking silently. Jonathan dragged him into an alcove, stripped him of his key card, radio, and sidearm, and left him unconscious. He moved fast after that. Through another corridor, past another storage block, and into what looked like a control hub. Here, terminals buzzed with activity. One screen showed live GPS coordinates of ships and transport planes. Another displayed a camera feed from outside a snow-covered helipad, idle now but clearly used. He inserted the drive into a console and initiated a data dump. Then he activated the emergency transmitter. A blinking light told him it had gone through, but whether it reached anyone was a different question. He encrypted the signal with a military cipher he'd once used overseas. If it reached a defense satellite or a NATO relay, it might trigger a response. He had minutes, maybe less. As he turned to leave, red lights flared in the corner of the room. Sirens didn't sound, no loud alarms, but he could feel the shift in air pressure, the tension in the walls. Security was closing in. He doubled back through the containment wing, pausing only to wedge a metal rod into the door mechanism. With luck, it would slow pursuit. Then he was running boots pounding against the metal grating, lungs heaving. He reached the ventilation shaft he had entered through and threw himself upward, scrabbling for purchase. His fingers slipped once, twice, but he managed to pull himself inside and begin the long, brutal crawl upward. By the time he emerged, night had fallen. The mountains were cloaked in blue shadow, and the sky glittered with stars. Jonathan lay on the snow for a moment, staring up, chest rising and falling, his body shaking with adrenaline. He had seen them. He had proof. And now he had to get it out before they realized what he had done. As he staggered down the slope, snow brushing his knees, the wind began to pick up again, curling around him like a warning. The mountain was quiet, still, but deep beneath it, something monstrous stirred, and now it knew it had been seen. Jonathan did not make it far that night. His body, already battered from days in the mountains, finally demanded what his mind refused to acknowledge: rest. He stumbled into the lower crevices of the ridge, where wind could not reach and the snow lay soft and quiet, and collapsed beneath the overhang of an ancient, half-buried boulder. His breath steamed in the cold as he peeled off his gloves, forcing food and water down his throat with mechanical focus. Every inch of him ached. The drive, now hidden in the lining of his jacket, felt heavier than steel against his ribs. He curled around it as he fell into a dreamless, shallow sleep. When the sun rose, it did so slowly, bleeding pale gold over the peaks as though the light itself was reluctant to touch the secrets buried there. Jonathan awoke stiff, cold, but alive. He allowed himself no time to dwell. The transmitter signal may have reached someone, but he couldn't know how long it would take for help to arrive, or whether the message had made it at all. Worse, he couldn't trust that it had gone unnoticed by whoever ran the facility. He needed to act before they sealed everything up, or worse, move the people deeper into the mountain where no one would ever find them. He stripped his pack down to essentials water, 2 high-calorie ration bars, rope, flashlight, extra gloves, and the sidearm he had taken from the unconscious guard. Ammunition was scarce, but he knew better than to rely on firepower. Stealth would serve him longer. He memorized the shaft routes, the blind spots, the delays in the camera rotations, and then he set off. There was no dramatic surge of resolve, no heroic final words whispered to the mountain wind. Just motion, one step, then another, downward into the ice. By mid-afternoon, he had returned to the intake shaft, again prying it loose with the flat edge of his axe. The air inside was warmer now, not from the machines but from activity. Something had changed. The hallway he dropped into was no longer silent. Farther off, voices echoed in short bursts. Commands, radio static, movement. He kept low, pressed tight to the walls, navigating by memory and instinct. The lighting had shifted. Some corridors were now under red illumination. Others flickered erratically, signs of disruption. He passed a door he'd left ajar the day before and found it sealed shut. Reinforced. They had tightened their perimeter. Still, he moved forward. The camera feeds were more difficult to access this time. Most terminals were locked down. He used the guard's key card on one of the access panels and found a single active feed. A group of people, maybe 20, herded into what looked like a storage block. No blankets, no supplies, just floor and walls. They were being moved. Jonathan's chest tightened. They were preparing for evacuation. He moved quickly now, retracing his path to the utility corridors. The air was heavier here, warmer. Power conduits lined the walls in thick bundles, humming with energy. He followed them until he found what he was looking for. The junction box for the facility's lighting and door systems. It was bolted and coated, but the guard's card bypassed the outer shell. Inside, a cluster of switches and fuses blinked patiently. He pulled 4 of them. The lights in the hallway dimmed. A distant klaxon sounded once, weak and strangled, then fell silent. He could only hope it would be enough. He made his way to the holding blocks, relying now on darkness and confusion. There were no guards visible in the immediate area, though he could hear them running, shouting, somewhere deeper in the complex. They were reacting to his sabotage. He passed 3 cells before he found someone awake enough to respond. A boy, maybe 10 years old, pressed against the glass, his hand flat to the wall. Jonathan froze. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then the boy stepped back and pointed to the door's control panel. It took precious seconds to break it open. The wiring was delicate and rushed, but he managed to short the lock with the edge of his knife and the charge pack from his headlamp. The door hissed and opened. The boy stumbled out, wide-eyed but silent. Behind him, a woman stirred on the floor. Jonathan motioned. She nodded slowly and helped the child to his feet. Others began to rise. He did not waste time speaking. He led them silently to the maintenance corridor and gestured to follow it until they reached a vertical ladder that led to a hidden service access tunnel, one he had marked the previous day. He drew a crude map on the floor with the blade of his knife and gave the boy a flashlight. Then he turned back. He freed 3 more rooms, 15 people in total. They moved like shadows, silent and shaking, many barefoot. In the last room, he found a man who could barely walk. Jonathan hoisted him over his shoulder and pushed forward. As he rounded the corner to the last holding block, he heard footsteps approaching, fast, armored. He ducked into a side passage and waited. 2 guards ran past, voices sharp. "They're moving them now," one barked. "Transit bay's live. Get to post 8." Jonathan followed at a distance. He reached a hallway he had not explored before. The ceiling arched higher here, the walls marked with warnings in red stencil. Transit Bay 1. Clearance required. The door ahead was thick, reinforced, and slightly ajar. Inside, the space was massive. A wide, flat chamber filled with containers, like the one he had discovered days ago in the snow. Some were sealed, others open, revealing narrow compartments inside. Beds, lights, chains. The room reeked of fuel and metal. 3 guards stood at the far end near a control panel. Behind them, a freight elevator rumbled into place. One container was already being loaded. Jonathan dropped low, slipping behind a row of crates. From here, he could see the backs of the guards. They were arguing. The air was tense. One of them kept glancing at his watch. He crept closer. The moment came quickly. The nearest guard turned, stepped away from the group. Jonathan moved in silence, catching him with the butt of his pistol. The man dropped. The other two spun at the noise, but by the time they reached the body, Jonathan was already behind a container. A moment later, a fire alarm tripped one he had rewired earlier. Sprinklers erupted from the ceiling in a rush of icy water. Panic followed. Shouts, confusion, one guard slipping, the other cursing into his radio. Jonathan struck. He took them down with practiced speed, silent, brutal, efficient. The room was his. He sprinted to the control panel and slammed the emergency lockdown switch. The elevator froze. Sirens now began to blare. Real this time, not staged. He keyed in the override for the cargo doors. One by one, they unlatched with a shudder. From within the sealed container, movement, then hands, then faces. People began to emerge. They were dazed, blinking under the sprinkler water. A few fell to their knees. Others just stood, stunned, as if unsure the nightmare had truly ended. Jonathan raised his voice for the first time in days. He told them where to run, where the tunnels led, what to avoid. He pointed to the ladder that climbed toward the upper corridors. Some nodded, some cried, some just moved, and still more emerged. One woman grabbed his arm before she left. Her mouth moved, forming words he couldn't hear over the sirens, but her eyes said enough. "Thank you." He turned back to the control panel. No time left. He loaded the last of the data onto a second drive and shoved it into his boot. Then he detonated the backup charge he had planted in the junction box. The lights died. Everything went dark. He moved blind now, leading the last group up through the maintenance tunnel, the cold rushing in from above. Snowflakes spiraled down through the shaft as if pulled by gravity itself. He shoved open the last hatch, letting daylight flood the space. The storm had passed, the sky clear and sharp. One by one they emerged. He counted 32. Behind them, buried in the mountain, the facility still burned with emergency lights and blinking warnings. But it had been exposed now, its walls cracked open, its prisoners freed. Jonathan stood at the ridge, breath steaming, body trembling. The cold returned quickly, but it no longer mattered. The first satellite ping had come minutes ago. Help was on the way. He turned and began the final climb. The mountain did not speak, but somewhere deep beneath the snow, it remembered what had been done. Dawn broke over the mountains with a deceptive calm. The snow, untouched from the night before, shimmered under the rising sun like sheets of burnished glass. The wind had quieted to a soft breath, and the sky above stretched wide and cloudless, the kind of crystalline blue that could make a man forget how cruel the earth beneath his feet could be. But Jonathan Kell did not look up. He lay curled beside the exit hatch, half buried in a drift, his body covered in frost and his breath slow and shallow. He was still conscious, though barely, his thoughts drifting in and out of focus. Each inhale scraped against the cold inside his lungs like broken glass. His limbs no longer obeyed him with precision, but he had done what he came to do. The people behind him, scattered along the ridgeline or huddled in the shade of the boulders, were alive. That knowledge held him steady against the encroaching blackness. It was the crack of rotor blades that pulled him fully back, a deep mechanical thrum, rhythmic and growing stronger. He forced his head up, blinking against the brightness. The helicopter came into view slowly, black, unmarked, military grade. Not search and rescue, something heavier. It hovered for a moment, then descended with care, sending snow spiraling in tight, wind-driven halos. Doors opened before the skids even touched down, and black-clad figures spilled out in quick, practice formation. Their weapons were raised, eyes scanning the horizon. One man barked orders into a headset while another gestured toward the freed captives. Jonathan tried to raise a hand. He managed little more than a twitch. The nearest officer spotted him. Two medics broke formation and rushed over. Their voices were sharp, professional. He felt their gloved hands on his shoulders, tilting him gently. A needle pricked the inside of his arm, and the fog began to lift. Within minutes, warm saline coursed through his veins, and the freezing numbness began to retreat from his fingers and toes. One of the medics shone a light into his eyes, murmured something, and nodded. "You're stable," someone said. "You're going to be okay." He wanted to tell them it wasn't about him. They found the others quickly. The freed hostages, though weakened and frightened, responded to the presence of uniforms with a wary relief. They were wrapped in thermal blankets and escorted into the belly of the second helicopter, which had arrived minutes later. The team moved efficiently, securing the perimeter, transmitting coordinates, calling in additional resources. Jonathan listened from the stretcher, too weak to rise, as confirmation passed through radios. There were more underground structures. The facility extended farther than first believed. Teams would be deployed to search every corridor. But the worst of it, the part that mattered, was already exposed. As the helicopters lifted, Jonathan watched the mountain grow smaller below them, shrinking into ridgelines and then into white folds. From this height, the horror buried in those slopes was invisible again. Just snow, just silence. They flew for hours. The transport aircraft landed at a high-security medical site, a joint operations base not marked on any public map. He was transferred to a recovery ward under armed guard, though the soldiers there treated him not as a threat, but as something far more fragile, a witness to something no one had prepared for. In the days that followed, his body healed faster than his mind. He ate little, slept often, and spoke only when necessary. The agents came first, suits with cold eyes and clipped voices. They asked questions for hours, recording every detail. He told them everything: the intake vents, the corridors, the storage containers, the children. He gave them the names on the shipment logs, the positions of the guards, the recordings he had salvaged from the control panels. Everything. He held nothing back. What followed was swift: international warrants, arrests in 4 countries, seizures of shipping records, offshore accounts, encrypted networks. A name emerged, then a web. The trafficking ring had been deeper and more entrenched than anyone feared, with funding that reached boardrooms and ports across continents. The mountain facility had been just one spoke in a wheel that turned in the shadows, but now it was broken. The operation crumbled under the weight of the evidence. One by one, the pillars holding it up collapsed. Jonathan remained in the facility for 2 weeks, longer than he needed to physically recover. He refused media interviews, declined offers of commendation. When a government official came to shake his hand, he sat still and said nothing. He had not done it for medals, not for recognition. There had simply been people in cages, and he had seen them. Eventually, he asked to return to his town, and they let him go without resistance. He walked out of the secure compound in civilian clothes, a simple pack over his shoulder, and boarded a bus that took him down from the mountains and into the valleys below. He stepped into his cabin near dusk. It was just as he had left it: cold, dark, still. He lit the fire, set water to boil, and sat in the old wooden chair by the stove. Outside, wind stirred the trees gently. The horizon glowed in orange and violet, fading slowly into night. For a long time he did not move. His body was lighter now. The weight in his chest, though not gone, had shifted. It no longer pulled him under. In the days that followed, reports flooded the national news. Headlines spoke of a hero climber who had uncovered the most extensive trafficking network in North America. Journalists dug for his name, for footage, for photos, but there were none. He had vanished from public view as quickly as he had entered it. They used a placeholder photo, a blurry image of a man in snow gear, taken by a drone during the extraction. Below it, speculation spiraled, but Jonathan did not watch. He spent his mornings walking the ridgelines, his afternoons mending gear, and his evenings in silence. He had nothing more to say. One afternoon, a letter arrived, no return address. Inside, a folded page and a small, hand-drawn picture, crayon on lined paper. It showed a mountain, a stick figure with a blue jacket, and a line of people holding hands at the base. Above them, a yellow sun. At the bottom, 2 words written in uneven print: "Thank you." There was no signature. He pinned it to the wall. Later that week, a government liaison called. They had identified over 70 individuals rescued from the mountain facility. Some had been missing for years. Families were being contacted. Diplomatic efforts were underway. The liaison spoke of healing, of international cooperation, of systems to ensure it would never happen again. Jonathan listened quietly. When the call ended, he stood and walked out to the porch. The snow had started again, falling soft and soundless onto the stone path. He stepped into it, boots crunching, The mountain loomed beyond the trees, veiled in cloud and fading light. He watched it for a long time, until it disappeared into the dark. He did not know if the evil buried there would ever be fully unearthed, but he had opened a door, let in the light, and sometimes that was enough. He returned inside and closed the door behind him. The fire crackled, warm and steady, and in the quiet, he began to breathe again. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next videos. Watch our other powerful stories. Each one reveals a truth worth hearing. And please share this video with someone who needs to see it.